The shot beneath Our Lady's eyes. The bells of Our Lady of the Harbor Church rang out over Harborview's sunlit waterfront, carrying the soft shimmer of a summer morning through open stained glass windows. Inside, white roses traced a quiet path toward the altar, where a marble statue of the Virgin Mary watched over the sanctuary with gentle, sorrowing eyes. Today was meant to be perfect, the wedding of Isabella Tran, beloved daughter of a renowned philanthropist, and Daniel Cole, a rising financial star. But down near the front pew, Ranger, the department's most trusted K9, was restless. His amber eyes tracked the choir loft, then drifted toward the side chapel where a single candle flickered beneath Our Lady of Sorrows. His ears pinned back, a low growl vibrated in his chest soft. Warning, ignored. Father Gabriel Moreno stepped into the glowing aisle, lifting the gospel to bless the couple. Sunlight touched the gold edges of the book like a breath from heaven. Then, a single, violent crack of gunfire split the air. Screams shattered the silence. The gospel fell. Father Gabriel collapsed at the foot of the altar, white vestments blooming red. Guests fled. Others froze. Chaos swelled like a wave. And in that chaos, Ranger made a choice. He bolted not toward the doors, not toward the shouting officers, but straight toward the statue of the Virgin Mary, where the candle's flames suddenly flared as if stirred by an unseen breath. The shooter was gone. The miracle and the truth had just begun. Harborview had always been a city of contradictions, quiet fishing boats rocking beside gleaming corporate towers, a waterfront kissed by sunlight, yet shadowed by rumors of corruption. For Officer Lucas Hayes, those contradictions mirrored the hollow ache in his own life. A decorated Marine turned K9 handler, he had learned long ago to put faith aside and trust only what he could track, touch, or fight. But Ranger was different. At 3 years old, the sable-coated German Shepherd had already earned a reputation for intuition that defied training manuals. He detected explosives before machines could beep, tracked suspects across rain-slick alleys, and once dragged a wounded officer out of a burning warehouse seconds before the roof collapsed. Lucas, who rarely trusted humans, found himself trusting Ranger more than he trusted himself. Their patrols often brought them past Our Lady of the Harbor, a humble church nestled between seafood carts and aging brick apartments. Lucas usually kept his distance, avoiding anything that reminded him of the faith he'd buried after the war. Yet Ranger always slowed near the steps, ears perked as if recognizing something or someone within. Father Gabriel Moreno was the kind of priest people crossed the street just to greet. Warm-eyed, soft-voiced, woven with a quiet strength. He worked with migrants, shelter volunteers, the forgotten. But lately, Lucas noticed something else. A heaviness behind the priest's smile, a tension in the way his fingers lingered on the rosary hanging from his belt. 3 nights before the wedding, Lucas and Ranger passed by the church on patrol. The front doors stood open, candles still burning. Inside, Father Gabriel knelt before the statue of the Virgin Mary, whispering urgently, as though confiding a secret to a mother. Ranger paused. A low, uncertain whine escaped him. Lucas frowned. "What is it, boy?" Ranger's gaze fixed on the priest, then drifted upward to Our Lady's sorrowing eyes, shimmering in candlelight. It struck Lucas as strange then. Later, he would remember that moment as the first warning. The morning of the Tran-Cole wedding broke warmer than expected, the kind of golden coastal light that made Harborview feel almost innocent. By 9 a.m., the sidewalks around Our Lady of the Harbor were alive with guests in pressed suits and pastel dresses, their laughter rising above the gulls circling the marina. Detectives, uniformed officers, and tactical units moved quietly through the crowd. The guest list was a parade of influenced CEOs, city officials, major donors to Catholic charities. Security had to be airtight. Lucas walked Ranger through one final sweep inside the church. The nave glowed, sunlight fractured through stained glass into patches of blue, red, and amber over the polished pews. The altar flowers, white lilies, and roses breathed out a faint sweetness. The marble statue of the Virgin Mary looked almost luminous in the aisle's mid-morning light, her gaze lowered in serene compassion. Everything looked perfect. Except Ranger. He halted beneath the choir loft, muscles tightening, his ears flicked sharply. A soft growl built in his throat, not a threat, but a question. Lucas followed his gaze upward. Shadows clung to the loft rail, but nothing moved. No heat signatures, no footprints. No irregular sounds, just dust, sunlight, and silence. "Ranger," Lucas murmured, rubbing his head gently. "It's just a wedding. No enemies today." But Ranger didn't look convinced. He shifted his stance and stared toward the side chapel, where the statue of Our Lady of Sorrows stood with a single candle burning at her feet. The flame bent sideways as though stirred by a breath in the still air. Lucas felt a faint chill brush his neck. Before he could think, a familiar voice called from behind him. "Lucas," Father Gabriel greeted softly, straightening his vestments. "Or perhaps I should say, Ranger's human." Lucas smirked despite himself. "Morning, Father, big day." Gabriel's smile thinned. "Bigger than anyone knows." Lucas frowned, but the priest didn't elaborate. Instead, Gabriel placed a gentle hand on Ranger's head. Ranger's ears dropped not in fear, but in recognition, almost reverence. A moment later, the music began to swell. Guests rose. The grand doors of the church opened to reveal Isabella Tran, radiant in lace and veil, stepping into the halo of sunlight. Everything looked beautiful. Everything felt wrong. Ranger's growl deepened, and for the second time in 3 days, Lucas ignored a warning he didn't understand. The music softened into a reverent hush as Isabella reached the front pews, her arm trembling lightly in her father's grasp. Camera flashes glittered like fireflies. The scent of flowers, incense, and polished wood mingled in the warm air. For a moment, the world inside Our Lady of the Harbor felt suspended, weightless, glowing, holy. Father Gabriel stepped forward, raising the gospel high. Sunlight caught the gilded edges, igniting them into a quiet halo. His voice, gentle but steady, carried through the nave. "May the Lord bless you and keep you." The rest of the blessing never came. A single violent gunshot cracked through the church like lightning splitting an oak. The sound slammed off stone walls. Guests screamed. Someone fell backward into the aisle, knocking over a vase of lilies that shattered in a spray of white petals. Father Gabriel staggered. The gospel slipped from his hands and struck the marble with a sharp, echoing thud. Red blossomed across his white vestments like a wound, tearing open the morning itself. Isabella's cry ripped through the air. Daniel dragged her down instinctively as chaos erupted, people scrambling over pews, heels snapping, children sobbing, cell phones shaking in frantic hands. A few guests froze, trapped between shock and terror, staring at the fallen priest as though reality itself had broken. Lucas reacted before thought. "Lock the doors! Seal the perimeter!" he shouted, weapon drawn. But the gunman had already vanished. In the flood of confusion, no one saw Ranger at first, not until he launched forward, ripping free from Lucas's grasp and racing, not toward the exit, but toward the side chapel. His claws skidded across the polished floor as he thrust his nose toward the base of the Marian statue, sniffing hard, pacing tight, urgent circles. Then he stiffened, lifted his muzzle, and emitted a sharp, piercing bark, the sound he made only when he found something undeniable. Lucas sprinted after him. Behind the statue, half concealed by shadows, a narrow maintenance hatch hung slightly ajar. The smell hit Lucas instantly sharp, metallic, unmistakable. Gunpowder. Ranger growled again, louder this time, eyes locked on the dark gap behind Our Lady of Sorrows. The shooter hadn't escaped through the doors. He had escaped through the church itself. And the first trace of him was hiding beneath the sorrowful eyes of the Virgin. Police flooded the sanctuary within minutes. Harsh LED beams cut through the incense haze, scattering across toppled pews and abandoned bouquets. Medics lifted Father Gabriel with trembling care, his blood still warm against the marble. The parishioners wept, whispered prayers, clung to rosaries. none ready to accept what had just happened beneath the gaze of the Virgin. But Lucas could not stop moving. He crouched beside the maintenance hatch Ranger had found. The hinges bore fresh scratches. A faint smear of rubberized climbing dust left a muted gray streak across the frame. Someone had scaled something fast, quiet, practiced. Forensics confirmed what Ranger had already told him. The shooter had passed through here, inches behind the Marian statue. A ladder led upward into a forgotten service tunnel, dusty except for a clear trail of boot impressions and fibers from tactical gloves, the same kind used by private security or mercenaries. Whoever fired that shot was not an amateur. He was prepared, confident, familiar with the church's blind spots. But the most unsettling thing wasn't the hatch. It was the room Father Gabriel lived in. Lucas entered the rectory for the first time later that afternoon. Ranger followed, tail low, moving with the caution of a dog entering holy ground. Gabriel's small bedroom was Spartan narrow bed, wooden desk, a simple crucifix, a half-burnt candle. But the desk drawers were filled with something that made Lucas's breath still in his chest. A ledger. Names of companies he recognized from Harborview's financial district. Diagrams of donation funnels. Transfers that circled through charitable foundations and vanished offshore. Pinned to the top page was a handwritten line in Father Gabriel's tidy script. Charity without truth becomes a weapon. Ranger bumped his nose against a metal file cabinet. When Lucas opened it, he found a stack of draft letters unsent, one to a bishop, another to a federal investigator, and one addressed simply, "To whoever protects the poor after me." Gabriel had documented everything, the discrepancies, the threats, the shadow money trail. He had even recorded anonymous messages warning him to stop asking questions about the Marian Relief Corridor. But none of the letters had left the room. Ranger sniffed the corner of the desk, then lifted his head sharply. A scent, gunpowder faint, diluted, but present. Whoever orchestrated this had been in Gabriel's room, and the priest had known he was running out of time. Lucas closed the ledger, feeling the weight of something larger than a killing. This wasn't just murder, it was a silencing. By evening, the sun had dipped low over Harborview, turning the marina water into a sheet of molten copper. Lucas and Ranger drove toward their next lead, Our Lady of the Harbor Shelter, the small haven Father Gabriel loved most. He spent countless hours here feeding migrants, finding beds for the homeless, and tutoring refugee kids in the evenings. If Gabriel had sensed danger, someone at the shelter might have noticed. The moment Lucas stepped inside, he felt the shift, a tremor of grief rippling through the cramped hall. Volunteers whispered in corners. A few clutched tissues. One woman prayed the rosary in trembling breaths. Gabriel had been their anchor. The shelter director, Mrs. Nguyen, met Lucas at the doorway. Her eyes were swollen, but her voice steady. Father Gabriel was worried, she said quietly. He never said why, but he prayed more than usual, harder. Lucas exchanged a glance with Ranger, who was already sniffing along the baseboards and office doors. Did he ever mention the Marian Relief Corridor? Lucas asked. Mrs. Nguyen's breath caught. She nodded slowly. Only once, he said. If a charity becomes a business, someone is suffering. She hesitated, then added, There was a man, Victor Cole, who visited the shelter 2 weeks ago, said he was reviewing donation allocations. But Father Gabriel didn't like him. They argued in the chapel. Lucas stiffened. Victor Cole was Daniel's uncle, the groom's side of the wedding. A philanthropic powerhouse, a man whose name appeared on multiple pages of Gabriel's ledger. Ranger padded into the small office at the end of the hall and froze, his ears pricked forward. He growled, not aggressively, but with conviction, like recognizing a scent he had been waiting to confirm. Lucas crouched beside him. On the desk lay a high-end jacket embroidered with the logo of Coal Harbor Investments, a faint dusting of rubberized climbing powder, the same from the maintenance hatch, and a stack of shredded paper in the trash bin. Lucas gently pieced a few strips together. Stop asking about the Marian funds. Final warning. Mrs. Nguyen's face paled. Victor said he wanted transparency, wanted to support us more. Lucas exhaled. Or He wanted to see what Gabriel knew. Ranger nudged Lucas's hand, then stared toward the chapel door. Inside, candles flickered before a simple wooden statue of the Virgin Mary. One flame bent sharply sideways, though there was no breeze. Lucas felt a chill ripple through him again. Gabriel had feared something, and someone had come here right into this shelter to make sure he stayed silent. But Ranger was already turning, nose to the floor, tracing a new scent. The next clue was waiting. The city grew colder as night draped itself over Harborview, despite the lingering heat of summer. Lucas drove straight to the apartment of Maria Alvarez, the parish accountant whose name appeared repeatedly in Father Gabriel's ledger. If anyone understood the financial labyrinth he had uncovered, it was her. But the moment he pushed open the apartment door with the landlord's trembling permission, Lucas knew something was wrong. The lights were off, the curtains half torn, papers scattered across the floor like fallen leaves after a storm. Ranger stepped in first, nose low, breath steady. He inhaled, once, twice, and then looked up at Lucas with an unmistakable message. She left alive, but not freely. There was no blood, no sign of a struggle severe enough to injure her, but the room bore the fingerprints of someone searching desperately or deliberately destroying evidence. Lucas knelt beside the table where a small ceramic statue of Our Lady of Guadalupe lay cracked in half. At its base, a rosary, Maria's rosary, had snapped, beads spilled in a crooked line across the floor. Ranger nosed the beads gently, then followed a scent trail to the kitchen trash chute. Inside, Lucas found something the intruders missed. Maria's laptop, dented but not wiped. Back at the precinct, the tech team worked quickly. The desktop held spreadsheets of donations, transfers, and accounts labeled with religious names, but leading to offshore shells Lucas recognized from Father Gabriel's ledger. Then they found a password-protected video folder titled Ave Maria. Inside was a single recording. Maria appeared on screen, eyes red-rimmed, voice trembling yet determined. "If you're watching this," she whispered, "I've already told Father Gabriel everything. I helped Victor Cole create the Marian Relief Corridor. I thought it was real charity, until I realized it was a laundering canal. I'm trying to make it right. He knows, they all know. If something happens to me, please tell Father Gabriel I'm sorry." She paused, swallowed, then whispered almost like a prayer, "And please, tell Our Lady I asked for her protection." Ranger sat beneath the flickering monitor, head tilted as though listening. Lucas replayed the last frame Maria, clutching her rosary before the screen cut to black. She had trusted Gabriel, and she had trusted the Virgin. Now, both of them were gone. Lucas felt something tightening in his chest, a mixture of anger, grief, and a faint stirring he couldn't name. Ranger suddenly stood, ears pointed toward the window, alert. Someone else was moving in this story, and the next thread led straight into the ranks of the police. By dawn, Harborview felt like a city holding its breath. Patrol cars crawled through the Marina District, radios crackling with clipped commands. The assassination of a priest in broad daylight inside a church during a wedding had already become national news. But Lucas knew the headlines were only brushing the surface. Ranger knew more. Even now, as they arrived at precinct headquarters, the dog's posture was taut, restless, searching. Inside the digital forensics room, tech analysts replayed surveillance footage gathered from businesses around the church. Lucas leaned over their shoulders, scanning for anything out of place. Then he saw it. A police-issued SUV parked illegally behind Our Lady of the Harbor just 20 minutes before the ceremony. Not unusual, except the assigned unit number belonged to Sergeant Mark Delaney, the officer overseeing security protocols for the wedding. But Delaney had sworn he was stationed at the south entrance the whole time. Lucas zoomed in. Ranger padded closer to the screen, nostrils twitching. The SUV door opened. A gloved hand, tactical black, briefly appeared, adjusting something inside the vehicle. Ranger let out a low, throaty growl. Lucas felt ice slip down his spine. "You've smelled that before, haven't you?" It was the same scent from the maintenance hatch. The same scent from the shelter office. The same scent clinging to Victor Cole's jacket. Delaney wasn't just sloppy, he was part of the infrastructure. The interrogation room lights buzzed overhead as Delaney was brought in. He tried to smirk, tried to lean back like a man with nothing to hide, but sweat betrayed him. "You disabled the internal cameras," Lucas said flatly. 12 seconds was all the shooter needed. Delaney's jaw clenched. "You don't understand who you're dealing with?" Ranger pressed forward, teeth bared, not threatening, but unmistakably certain. Lucas placed a photo on the table, a still frame of Delaney's SUV with the gloved hand exposed. Delaney broke in less than a minute. "It was just supposed to be privacy," he muttered. "For a donor. They told me it was personal. High-profile guests, no cameras, special request." "Who is they?" Lucas pressed. Delaney swallowed hard. "Pier 3. A whisper. A confession. A curse. They move the money through there," Delaney continued. "Shipments, containers. And the man paying me, the man behind everything, was meeting someone the night before the wedding." "Name?" Lucas demanded. But Delaney didn't say Victor Cole. He said something far colder. "Someone higher up. Someone you won't touch." He looked directly at Ranger. "You won't make it out of that pier alive." Ranger growled again, deeper this time. Lucas stood. If Pier 3 was the next link, they were heading there now. And somewhere in the shadows of Harborview's industrial docks, the conspiracy Father Gabriel died for was waiting. Pier 3 didn't look dangerous at first glance. Just a stretch of rusted cranes, creaking ropes, and cargo towers rising like dark monoliths against the hazy morning sky. Seagulls screamed overhead, wind whipped through the metal skeletons, and the air smelled of diesel, brine, and secrecy. Lucas tightened his grip on Ranger's harness as they stepped past the chain-link gate. This wasn't standard police territory anymore, this was the underbelly. The place where donations, relief supplies, and charity shipments passed through the same docks as contraband and offshore cash. Ranger stopped suddenly. His body stiffened, head snapping toward a row of red and white containers stacked 3 high. Lucas followed the line of his gaze. One container was stenciled with a familiar label, Marian Devotionals, Religious Goods. The same charity branding Maria had mentioned. The same supply route tied to Victor Cole's foundations. Ranger pulled hard. Lucas let him lead. The closer they got, the stronger Ranger's reaction became, ears pinned, breath short, tail rigid. He was tracking more than human scent now. Something chemical, something dangerous. Lucas motioned for backup. 2 tactical officers slid the heavy latch free. The container groaned open. Inside were crates filled with cheap plastic rosaries, fluorescent Marian nightlights, and mass-produced holy cards meant for disaster relief zones. But the deeper they looked, the more wrong it felt. Ranger barked sharply and threw his weight toward a stack of crates near the back wall. Lucas pried open the nearest. Not devotional goods. Cash. Bundles and bundles of cash, shrink-wrapped in layers. Dozens of forged documents. Blank passports. Offshore account keys. And beneath them, a sleek, compact rifle with a suppressor, the exact caliber used to kill Father Gabriel. Lucas's stomach dropped. This wasn't a charity shipment. This was the artery of the entire laundering network. Then Ranger froze, utterly still, nose quivering, eyes locked on something under the floor plate. Lucas crouched, pulled the metal panel aside. A device stared back at him, a homemade explosive, simple, dirty, powerful enough to ignite the container and incinerate every piece of evidence instantly. And it was wired to a crude pressure switch, with the slightest shift capable of triggering it. Lucas whispered. They wanted whoever found this to die. Ranger let out a low, furious growl. The bomb squad arrived in minutes, working with trembling hands to disarm the trap. When the final wire snapped safely free, everyone exhaled. Everyone except Lucas. He stared at the crates of rosaries and counterfeit donations corruption hiding behind the face of Holy Mercy. Ranger nudged his hand. Lucas looked up. Across the pier, a small, the weather-beaten statue of Mary left behind by a long-retired dock worker stood facing the water. Sunlight caught her chipped blue mantle, glowing faintly through the fog. For a moment, The chaos felt still, almost guided. Lucas rose, jaw set. This was no longer just a murder case. It was a dismantling of something evil that had wormed its way into mercy itself. And Pier 3 was only the beginning. The evidence from Pier 3 hit the precinct like a thunderclap, sending every available unit scrambling. But Lucas couldn't shake the hollow certainty in his gut. Victor Cole hadn't built this network alone. Someone had helped him gain access inside the church. And one name kept resurfacing. Elena Morales. Wedding planner, event coordinator, the woman responsible for securing vendor access, scheduling deliveries, and coordinating all movement inside Our Lady of the Harbor in the weeks leading up to the ceremony. Lucas found her in her studio, a white-walled space filled with silk flowers, clipboards, and mood boards of smiling couples. She jumped when he entered, eyes too wide, pulse hammering visibly at her throat. Ranger stiffened immediately. He did not bark. He simply stared a cold, assessing stare he used only when he knew someone was lying. "Elena," Lucas said calmly, "we just found a container full of laundered cash and the murder weapon, tied to Victor Cole, and tied to the church." Her breath snagged. I don't know anything about that." "Then why?" Lucas continued, sliding a printed bank record onto her desk. "Did your company receive a consultation fee from a shell firm linked to Cole Harbor Investments 2 days before the wedding?" Her facade cracked. She sank into her chair, trembling. "It wasn't supposed to be violent. He said it was for security staging. That some guests didn't want cameras. He made me map access points. The loft, the side chapel, the maintenance hatch. I didn't know they'd kill a priest." Ranger growled low, his instincts disagreeing. Before Lucas could press further, his radio exploded with static and shouting. "Fire at the harbor shelter. Possible arson. Multiple people inside." Lucas bolted for the door. Ranger was already sprinting. The shelter was engulfed in smoke when they arrived, flames licking the windows like hungry fingers. Volunteers stumbled out coughing, guiding trembling elderly residents through the haze. Lucas and Ranger plunged into the hallway, heat blasting their faces, searching for stragglers. A wooden beam cracked overhead. Ranger shoved Lucas aside just as it collapsed. In the main entryway, black soot coated almost everything, chairs overturned, walls blistered, papers drifting like dark snow. But one thing hadn't burned. Above the doorway, a small framed image of the Virgin Mary hung crooked but untouched. The glass uncracked, the colors unnervingly vibrant against the charred wall. A firefighter swore under his breath. "Everything else is ruined, except that?" Lucas stared, lungs burning, heart pounding. Someone had tried to erase Gabriel's refuge. They failed. And Ranger, panting, eyes sharp despite the smoke, turned toward the harbor road. He had caught a scent. Someone was running, and the hunt was about to begin. Harbor View's fog rolled in, thick and low as night fell, turning the waterfront into a maze of shadows and silvered outlines. Units converged on the coastal district after a tip traced the arson getaway car to Cole's seaside villa, a glass and stone fortress perched arrogantly over breaking waves. Every window glowed with the kind of confidence only money could buy. But fear had begun to crack that confidence. Inside, as Lucas and the tactical team surrounded the property, Victor Cole was already fleeing, briefcase in hand, escorted by 2 armed private guards toward a motorboat idling at the private dock. The fog swirled like smoke around them, blurring their edges. Lucas and Ranger burst from the tree line at the exact moment the guards spotted movement. Gunfire ripped through the night. Lucas dove behind a bollard, but Ranger surged forward with a snarl that cut through the gunshots. The shepherd darted left, then right, drawing fire away from officers, forcing the gunmen to redirect their aim. "Ranger, down!" Lucas shouted. But Ranger wasn't listening. Not this time. He had eyes only on Victor, on the briefcase he carried, clutching like a life raft. A shot rang out closer, harsher. Ranger yelped. Lucas's heart stopped. The dog stumbled but didn't fall. Blood streaked his flank, but he pushed forward with a ferocity born of instinct, loyalty, and something that felt almost like faith or obedience to a mission larger than himself. Victor reached the edge of the dock just as Ranger collided with him, knocking him sideways. The briefcase skittered across the wet planks, teetered, and nearly slid into the dark water. Lucas sprinted, boots slamming the boards. A guard raised his pistol, aimed directly at Lucas. Ranger, wounded and gasping, lunged again, colliding with the guard's legs, throwing off his aim. A bullet sparked against metal instead of flesh. Lucas tackled Victor and wrestled him to the dock as officers swarmed in. The briefcase lay inches from the edge. Lucas grabbed it before the tide could claim it. Inside, beneath financial ledgers and offshore account keys, lay a letter stamped with a Marian emblem, one used by Catholic charities worldwide. But the contents weren't holy. They were orders. Neutralize Father Gabriel. Silence Alvarez. Compromise internal cameras. Destroy container evidence if discovered. Each directive signed not by Victor Cole, but by someone listed only as Peregrine. Victor trembled. "You don't understand," he whispered, voice cracking. "There are levels above me. I never wanted it to go this far." Lucas stood over him, soaked, shaking, furious. "You killed a priest," Lucas said, voice low, vibrating. "And you tried to kill the truth he died protecting." Victor's eyes flicked to Ranger, bleeding, trembling but standing proudly at Lucas's side. "He wasn't supposed to fight like that," Victor muttered. Lucas knelt beside Ranger, pressing his hand over the wound. The dog leaned into his touch, steady, trusting. Above them, the fog shifted. Through it, the villa's courtyard statue of the Virgin Mary cracked, weather-worn, stood with arms open, mantle shimmering faintly beneath the moon. The moment held. Ranger's breathing steadied. Victor Cole was finally in cuffs, but Peregrine, the architect behind it all, was still out there, and the darkness had just begun to lift. The emergency veterinarian's clinic was quiet in the way battlefields are quiet after the smoke clears, heavy, trembling, unreal. Ranger lay on a steel table, sides rising and falling in shallow, uneven breaths. The bullet hadn't gone deep, but the impact had torn muscle and left splinters of metal that now threatened infection. Tubes ran from his leg. A soft, rhythmic beep tried to reassure Lucas that there was still time. Lucas hadn't sat in a room like this since the war. He hadn't prayed since then either. He sank into the plastic chair beside Ranger's table, elbows on knees, fingers knotted so tightly his knuckles turned white. Outside the window, Harborview's neon lights flickered like dying stars. Inside, everything felt too bright, too sterile, too fragile. "Come on, buddy," he whispered, voice cracking. "You don't get to check out on me. Not after everything." Ranger stirred weakly, eyes half opening. His tail gave a faint, exhausted thump. Lucas swallowed hard. "I wasn't fast enough. I didn't protect you. I should have." The words dissolved in his throat. A soft knock came at the door. It was Father Miguel, the assistant priest temporarily overseeing Our Lady of the Harbor until the diocese appointed someone new. He carried a small wooden box, Father Gabriel's travel kit for anointing the sick. "Ranger has protected this city," Father Miguel said gently. "It's only right we pray for him." Lucas shook his head. "I don't. I'm not someone who—" He gestured vaguely toward the heavens, unable to finish. Father Miguel didn't push. He simply placed a small Marian medal on the blanket beside Ranger. For courage, for healing, for companionship. When the priest left, Lucas picked up the medal without quite knowing why. The medal felt warm, almost pulsing against his palm. He stared at it for a long time. Then only Ranger heard the words spoken in a broken whisper. "Okay, if you're there, if she's watching him the way Gabriel believed, please, please don't take him away from me." The monitor beeped steadily, unchanged. But Ranger let out a soft breath, slow and deep, the kind of breath that meant his body was fighting its way back. Lucas pressed his forehead to Ranger's, eyes burning. He didn't know if it was a miracle. He didn't know if he believed in miracles. But for the first time in years, he felt, heard. And somewhere in the hall, beneath a dim exit light, The Marion metal glimmered as though catching sunlight that wasn't there. 1 month passed, and Harborview slowly began stitching itself back together. The headlines that once screamed tragedy now carried updates on the sweeping corruption case. Victor Cole, his financial officers, and the compromised police sergeant all awaited trial. Investigators called Father Gabriel's notes the backbone of the entire case. Maria Alvarez, found and safely placed under witness protection, was preparing to testify. But the true heartbeat of the city's recovery beat inside Our Lady of the Harbor. The church reopened quietly on a mild Sunday morning. Sunlight filtered softly through the restored stained glass windows, scattering warm color across the pews. Parishioners trickled in, some in grief, some in gratitude, all carrying the memory of the priest who had confronted darkness with compassion instead of fear. Lucas stood near the back, feeling out of place in uniform, but unable to stay away. Beside him, walking stiffly but proudly, was Ranger, healed enough to resume gentle duty. The scar along his ribs glinted beneath his harness, a reminder of how close he had come to being another name on Harborview's memorial wall. At the start of Mass, the bishop stepped forward holding a small silver object. "A symbol of gratitude," he announced, "for the one who protected us even when we could not protect him." He motioned toward Ranger. The congregation rose, applause swelling like waves against the altar steps. Children gasped. Elderly parishioners wept openly. Lucas placed a steady hand on Ranger's back as the shepherd walked forward with quiet dignity. The medal was simple, an image of Our Lady on one side and a cross on the other. But when the bishop pinned it to Ranger's harness, the stained glass sunlight caught the metal and sent a soft, warm glow through the church. A glow that lingered a moment longer than light should linger. Ranger sat at the foot of the altar, just beneath the marble statue of Mary. His breathing was calm, his gaze steady. He looked home. Later, as the crowd thinned, Lucas approached the statue alone. He wasn't sure what he was supposed to feel, or say, or believe. But standing there, Ranger curled silently at Mary's feet. He felt something he hadn't felt in years. Peace. Not certainty. Not answers. Just peace. He placed Father Gabriel's worn Marian prayer card at the base of the statue. "For him," Lucas whispered, "and for us." Ranger nudged Lucas's hand gently, as if affirming the gesture. Outside, Harborview's bells began to ring again, this time not in warning, but in renewal. The case wasn't over. The name Peregrine still haunted the margins of every report. But Lucas knew one thing with absolute clarity. Whatever darkness remained, he and Ranger would face it together. And wherever their path led next, they would not walk it alone. In a world that often feels overwhelmed by shadows, it's easy to forget how small acts of loyalty, instinct, and sacrifice can push the darkness back. But stories like Ranger's remind us that courage doesn't always roar. It sometimes limps, breathes through pain, and keeps standing anyway. And sometimes, hope arrives in ways we never expect, through a worn prayer card, a flickering candle, a scar on a faithful dog's side, or a quiet nudge from a mother who never abandons her children. If this journey touched your heart, we invite you to stay with us. On Pawprints of Valor, we honor the heroes who walk on 4 paws, the people they protect, and the grace that carries them through every valley. Like this video, share it with someone who needs a reminder of courage, and subscribe to the channel so you won't miss the next story. Because here, every pawprint has meaning, and every story carries a spark of light. Not all angels have wings. Some have fur, courage, and a heartbeat that refuses to quit.